A wedding invitation printed on thick pearlescent cardstock arrives at the doorstep of a small, cramped apartment. It's for the marriage of Michael Graham to Vanessa Reed. But the recipient isn't a friend or a distant relative. She is Jessica Hartwell Michael's wife of 7 years, 8 months pregnant with his child. He didn't even have the decency to file for divorce first. This single piece of paper was not just an invitation. It was a declaration of war, the beginning of a story of ultimate betrayal. But it was also the catalyst for a revenge so complete, so breathtaking, that it would take 20 years to unfold, culminating in her son holding the fate of his father's entire empire in the palm of his hand. The air in their Greenwich, Connecticut home always smelled of something expensive. Sometimes it was the Dutch tulips Michael had delivered twice a week. Other times it was the faint, clean scent of the leather on his new Aston Martin. For Jessica Hartwell Graham, it was the smell of success, or so she'd told herself. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece. Michael, a razor-sharp vice president at Sterling Coal Capital, was the kind of man whose ambition was a physical force, pulling everyone in his orbit along for the ride. Jessica, a talented architect, who had set aside her own burgeoning career to support his, was the perfect counterpart, elegant, intelligent, and the gracious host of countless dinner parties designed to propel Michael further up the corporate ladder. Their brownstone was her canvas. She had redesigned it from a hollowed-out shell into a warm, modern sanctuary of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood. It was featured in Modern Living Quarterly. Friends would whisper, "Jessica, you're a genius. You should start your own firm." She would smile a practiced, gentle curve of her lips and say, "Maybe one day. Right now, my biggest project is on its way." She would place a hand on her swelling belly, and the conversation would shift to baby names and nursery colors. The baby, a boy, was their final masterpiece, the keystone in the arch of their perfect life. They had settled on the name Daniel. Michael had been ecstatic, or at least he had performed ecstasy convincingly. He'd kissed her belly in front of their friends, the Baldwins and the Carters, and declared himself the luckiest man alive. But in the quiet moments when the performance ended, cracks began to show. They were hairline fractures, at first easy to ignore. He started staying later at the office, his excuses seamless tapestries of closing a big deal or mentoring a new analyst. The new analyst's name, she would later learn, was Vanessa Reed. Then came the phone calls he would take on the terrace, his voice a low, urgent murmur that the wind snatched away. A new cloying scent started clinging to his suits, a perfume that wasn't hers, something sweet and cheap. When she asked, he'd laugh it off. "Must be from someone in the elevator, Jess. You know how those things are." He was a master gaslighter, turning her valid suspicions into evidence of her own hormonal paranoia. "It's just the pregnancy, honey," he'd say, stroking her hair. "Your senses are on high alert. Relax." And she tried. She wanted to believe him more than anything. This life, this man, this unborn child, they were her everything. To doubt Michael was to doubt her own judgment to admit that the entire structure of her world was built on a lie. So she painted the nursery a soft, calming blue, assembled the crib with her own 2 hands, and folded tiny onesies with a growing sense of dread she couldn't name. The last good evening was a Tuesday in May. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wisteria from the garden. Jessica had made his favorite osso buco, a slow-braised labor of love. He was late as usual, but when he walked in, he was carrying a small velvet box from Tiffany & Co. Her heart leaped. An apology. A recognition of his distance. "I saw this, and thought of you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. She opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver rattle exquisitely crafted. It was a beautiful, thoughtful gift for their son. She felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy. She was being foolish paranoid. He loved her. He loved their baby. "Oh, Michael, it's perfect," she whispered, tears welling. He hugged her, but his embrace felt different, hollow, perfunctory. He held her for a moment, his chin resting on her head, his eyes staring blankly at the wall behind her. It wasn't the hug of a husband. It was the hug of a man saying goodbye. He just hadn't told her yet. 3 days later, he went on a business trip to Chicago. On Saturday morning, Jessica was sorting through their credit card statements online, preparing to pay the bills, when she saw a charge that made the air freeze in her lungs. A charge from the night before, not from a Hyatt in Chicago, but from a small, notoriously romantic boutique hotel called the Arbor Inn, just 40 miles away in Westport. And beneath it, another charge from a jeweler in the same town, Bulgari, serpentini necklace, $28,000. She had never received a serpentini necklace. The silver rattle suddenly felt like a cheap prop, a diversion. The perfect life, the gilded cage, didn't just have cracks. The floor had just fallen out. The silence in the house was a living thing. It pulsed in the space where Michael's laughter used to be. For hours, Jessica just sat at her polished concrete kitchen island, staring at the laptop screen. The 2 lines of text, "The Arbor Inn Bulgari," were like a death sentence. Every late night, every hushed phone call, every dismissive laugh clicked into place, forming a sickeningly clear picture. She called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Michael Graham's office. I'm currently unavailable." His voice, so smooth and professional, felt like a stranger's. She called again, and again. On the 7th try, a woman answered. The voice was young, a little breathless, and laced with annoyance. "Hello," Jessica's blood ran cold. I'm trying to reach Michael Graham. This is his number." There was a muffled sound, and then the woman's voice, sharper this time. "Who is this?" "This is his wife, Jessica," said the words, tasting like ash. A pause. Then a saccharine sweetness dripped into the woman's tone. "Oh, you must be Jessica. Michael's told me so much about you. He should be back in a bit. We just stepped out for brunch. The word was a slap. Jessica hung up without another word, her hand trembling so violently she could barely hit the screen. He walked in 2 hours later, looking refreshed, tanned, and utterly unapologetic. He placed his briefcase on the floor and loosened his tie, not even looking at her. "Hey, I'm back." "The trip was a killer," he said, heading for the refrigerator. Jessica stood motionless, the laptop still open on the island. "How was Westport?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He froze his hand on the refrigerator door. He turned slowly, and for the first time the mask of the doting husband fell away completely. His face was cold, impassive. There was no shock, no guilt, only a weary annoyance, as if she were a mild inconvenience he finally had to deal with. "So, you know," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know you spent last night at the Arbor Inn. I know you bought a $28,000 necklace that I never saw. Who is she, Michael?" "Her name is Vanessa Reed," he said, his tone flat. "She's an analyst at the firm. And I love her." The words were so simple, so brutal. They bypassed her brain and went straight to her heart, shattering it like glass. She clutched her stomach, a protective instinct for the innocent life caught in the crossfire. "You love her," Jessica's voice cracked. "What about us? What about this baby?" "Your son, Jessica." "Let's not be dramatic," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Things haven't been right between us for a long time. We've been living like roommates. This is for the best. Roommates, I have given up my entire life for you, for us. I am carrying your child, she screamed, the sound raw and torn from her throat. And I will provide for the child, of course, he said as if discussing a business transaction. I'm not a monster. I'll set up a generous trust. You'll be taken care of. That was when the true horror of the situation dawned on her. This wasn't a confession. This was a notification. He had already made his decision. He had a plan. She and their unborn son were line items in his budget for a new life. I want you out, she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. He actually smirked. I think you have it backward, Jess. This house is in my name. The assets are mine. My lawyer will be in touch with you on Monday to discuss the arrangements. I suggest you find your own counsel. He turned and walked towards the stairs. I'll just pack a bag. I'll be staying with Vanessa from now on. The next few days were a blur of legal jargon and humiliation. Michael's lawyer, a piranha named Arthur Finch, was ruthless. He presented a prenuptial agreement Jessica had signed 7 years ago, a document she barely remembered thinking it a mere formality for a man from a wealthy family. The agreement was ironclad. She was entitled to a small one-time settlement. But the house, the cars, the investments, they were all his. We are prepared to offer a monthly child support payment that is adequate, Finch said, his lips curling around the word as if it were distasteful. Jessica's lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Maria, advised her to take it. Fighting him will drain you emotionally and financially. He has the resources to drag this out for years. Defeated and heartbroken, Jessica agreed. She was given 2 weeks to vacate the home she had poured her soul into. While she packed her life into cardboard boxes, a moving truck arrived with Michael's things, and a sleek black Porsche pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Vanessa Reed. She was everything Jessica wasn't. Younger by at least a decade, with long platinum blonde hair, a surgically perfected figure poured into a designer dress, and a look of triumphant ownership on her face. She walked up the stone path, not even glancing at Jessica, and began directing the movers as if she'd lived there for years. The final soul-crushing blow came a week after she moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment her parents helped her secure. It was a wedding invitation. Michael Graham and Vanessa Reed requested the honor of her presence at their marriage ceremony. It was to be held in 3 weeks at the Greenwich Country Club. He hadn't even waited for the ink to dry on their separation papers, let alone file for divorce. He was flaunting it, rubbing her nose in his betrayal, showing the world how quickly he had replaced her. Jessica crumpled the invitation in her fist, a guttural sob escaping her lips. She slid down the wall of her small, empty apartment, surrounded by boxes filled with the remnants of a shattered life. She was 35 years old, 8 months pregnant, and utterly alone. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a demolition. Michael hadn't just left her, he had erased her. The weeks that followed were a descent into a gray, featureless landscape of grief. Jessica moved through the days like a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. The small apartment in Stamford felt like a prison. The smell of fresh paint and new carpets couldn't mask the scent of failure. She'd go from unpacking a box of baby clothes, her hands tracing the tiny embroidered animals, to collapsing in a heap of tears, the weight of her solitude pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Her friends tried to help. Her best friend Beth would come over with groceries and sit with her for hours, offering a steady, silent presence when words were useless. But many of the couple friends she and Michael had shared quietly vanished. Their invitations to barbecues and brunches stopped. She was a social liability now, a walking pregnant reminder that perfect marriages could implode overnight. She had been relegated to the island of divorced women, a place they didn't want to acknowledge existed. The day of Michael and Vanessa's wedding was the lowest point. The sun shone with an obscene cheerfulness. Jessica knew, because she'd tortured herself by looking it up online, that the ceremony was at 4 p.m. At 4:15, she imagined Vanessa walking down the aisle in a cloud of white silk, her father's place at the altar, filled by a man who was still legally Jessica's husband. She pictured their friends, her friends applauding, toasting the happy couple, celebrating on the ruins of her life. The humiliation was a physical pain, a hot poker twisting in her gut. That evening, the first contraction hit. It was sharp, sudden, and terrifying. It was too early. Panicked, she called Beth, who rushed her to the hospital. The labor was long and arduous, a 22-hour ordeal fueled by stress and heartbreak. There was no loving husband holding her hand, no one whispering words of encouragement. There was only the clinical beeping of machines, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the crushing weight of doing the most profound thing a woman can do completely alone. At 2:17 p.m. the next day, Daniel Hartwell was born. Jessica had made a decision in the throes of labor. Her son would not carry the name of the man who had abandoned him. He would carry her name, the name of the one who stayed. Holding him for the first time, a tiny, fragile being with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, something inside Jessica shifted. The endless gray landscape of her grief was suddenly pierced by a single, brilliant ray of light. This tiny person wholly dependent on her was not a burden. He was a reason. His small, grasping hand clutching her finger was an anchor in the storm. She looked into his newborn face and made a silent vow Michael Graham might have taken her past, but he would not take their future. The first few years were a relentless grind. The settlement money, which had seemed substantial in the lawyer's office, evaporated with frightening speed. Rent, diapers, formula, medical bills. It was a constant draining hemorrhage of funds. The adequate child support Michael provided barely covered Daniel's daycare. It was a calculated amount, just enough to fulfill his legal obligation, but not enough to provide any real comfort, a final twist of the knife. Jessica was forced to sell the few pieces of valuable jewelry she had from her marriage, each sale, feeling like she was auctioning off a piece of her own history. She took on freelance drafting work, staying up until 3 a.m., after Daniel was asleep. Her eyes burning from staring at a computer screen, her back aching from the cheap office chair she'd bought at a thrift store. She saw Michael and Vanessa's life only in glossy snapshots in society magazines that Beth would quickly hide when she came to visit. The Grahams at the winter ball. Vanessa. Graham chairs, charity gala. They had twin daughters, Piper and Paisley, always dressed in matching designer outfits. Their world of polo matches and European vacations was so far removed from her reality of clipping coupons and worrying about the electricity bill that it might as well have been on another planet. There was one encounter she couldn't avoid. When Daniel was 4, she ran into them at a high-end toy store. She had saved for months to buy him a specific Lego set for his birthday. As she stood in the checkout line, she heard that familiar booming laugh. Michael was standing by a display of enormous ride-on electric cars, with Vanessa beside him, looking bored. Their 2 daughters were flitting between toys, grabbing whatever they wanted. Michael spotted her. His face registered a brief flash of something, was it shock, guilt? Before settling back into his usual mask of cool indifference. "Jessica?" he said, his voice a little too loud. "Fancy seeing you here." Vanessa's eyes swept over Jessica's sensible jeans and worn-out coat, then down to the single Lego box in her hand. A faint, condescending smile played on her lips. "Hello, Michael." "Vanessa." Jessica said, her voice steady. She pulled Daniel, who was hiding behind her legs, forward. "This is Daniel." Michael looked down at his son, the son he had never once asked to see, as if observing a curious specimen. He offered a tight corporate smile. "Big guy, aren't you?" He didn't offer to shake his hand or touch him. "Daddy, I want this one, and this one," one of his daughters whined, tugging on his sleeve. "Of course, sweetie, whatever you want." Michael said, his attention immediately shifting. He pulled out a black credit card and handed it to the sales assistant. "We'll take all 3 of the cars, and whatever else the girls have picked out. The bill came to several $1,000s. He signed the slip without even looking at the total. As they left, laden with bags, Vanessa gave Jessica one last pitying look over her shoulder. It was a look that said, "I won. You lost. This is my life now, and you're just a footnote." As Jessica paid for her single box of Legos with her carefully saved cash, the cashier gave her a sympathetic glance. Jessica just smiled, squeezed Daniel's hand, and walked out. The humiliation still stung, but as she looked at her son's excited face, she felt a different emotion taking root, a cold, hard resolve. Pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had work to do. The encounter at the toy store was the catalyst. Humiliation, Jessica realized, was a powerful fuel if you knew how to use it. That night, after putting Daniel to bed, she didn't open her freelance drafting software. Instead, she opened a dusty portfolio case from the back of her closet. Inside were her old architectural drawings from college and her brief time at a firm before Michael. Spreading them across her small living room floor, she saw not just designs for buildings, but blueprints of a life she had abandoned. The spark was still there. She felt a familiar thrill looking at the elegant lines, the innovative use of space. But a firm wouldn't hire a single mother who'd been out of the industry for nearly a decade. She had no capital, no connections. All she had was a laptop, a keen eye for design, and a burning need to build a life where no one could ever look at her with pity again. Her big idea didn't arrive in a flash of lightning. It started as a small, practical problem. The daycare Daniel attended was a dreary, cramped space with poor lighting and no functional play areas. The parents complained constantly, but the owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, had no budget for a professional renovation. On a whim, Jessica stayed late one afternoon and sketched out a new floor plan on a napkin. She envisioned knocking down a non-structural wall to create an open-plan space, designing modular multifunctional furniture that could be used for play and storage, and adding large, low-set windows to bring in natural light. It was simple, cost-effective, and transformative. She showed the sketch to Mrs. Gable, expecting nothing, but the woman's eyes lit up. "My goodness, dear. This is wonderful." Over the next 2 months, Jessica worked for free. She rallied the parents into a volunteer force. She sweet-talked a local lumber yard, Peterson's Lumber, into donating materials. She spent her weekends painting walls and assembling furniture, with Daniel helping by making a mess with his own set of toy tools. When it was finished, the daycare was unrecognizable. It was bright, airy, and joyful. The parents were astounded. One of them, a man named Robert Miller, who ran a popular local blog about family life in Fairfield County, was so impressed he wrote a feature story about the project. He called it The Stamford Daycare Miracle: How One Mom Reimagined a Space with Heart and Soul. He included photos of Jessica smiling and paint-splattered and praised her genius for family-centric sustainable design. The blog post went viral locally. Jessica's phone began to ring. It wasn't a flood, but it was a start. A young couple wanted her to redesign their cramped kitchen. A family needed help turning their damp basement into a usable playroom. Her fees were modest, but for the first time in years, it was her own money earned from her own talent. She decided to formalize her business. She named it Hartwell Designs. She used a small inheritance from her grandmother to build a professional website showcasing her work with high-quality before and after photos. Her niche became clear. She wasn't creating sterile minimalist spaces for wealthy bachelors. She was designing for real families. She focused on sustainability, using reclaimed materials and energy-efficient solutions long before it was trendy, because for her clients, saving money on utility bills mattered. She understood that a home wasn't just a showpiece, it was the backdrop for a life. Her reputation grew through word of mouth. Each project was a brick, and she was slowly, painstakingly building a new foundation for herself and her son. It was an exhausting existence. She was the CEO, the designer, the project manager, and the bookkeeper, all while being a full-time single mother. There were nights she fell into bed too tired to even dream the scent of sawdust in her hair. Daniel was the center of her new world. He grew up on construction sites, learning the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver before he could properly ride a bike. He saw his mother's exhaustion, but more importantly, he saw her resilience. He saw her commanding the respect of contractors, negotiating with suppliers, and calming anxious clients. He was watching his mother build an empire from ashes, one brick at a time. One evening when Daniel was about 8, he was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching in a notepad, while Jessica reviewed blueprints. "Mom," he said, his voice serious. "When I grow up, I'm going to build a company too. And I'm going to make so much money that you never have to be tired again." Jessica looked at him, at his determined little face, and her heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt. She knelt beside him and wrapped him in a hug. "You don't have to worry about that, sweetie," she whispered into his hair. "I'm not tired. I'm building." She wasn't just building houses. She was building a future, a legacy, and a fortress. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that its walls would be impenetrable. The next decade was a blur of relentless work and steady upward momentum. Hartwell Designs became the go-to firm in Connecticut for thoughtful, family-oriented architecture. Jessica's name became synonymous with a specific kind of understated luxury homes that were not only beautiful, but also livable, intuitive, and deeply personal. She was no longer the woman taking on small kitchen remodels. She was now designing multi-million-dollar homes from the ground up in Greenwich and New Canaan, often for clients who were quietly defecting from the soulless, ostentatious firms that Michael and his crowd favored. She was featured in Architectural Digest not as a local blogger's miracle mom, but as a visionary designer. The article praised her empathetic approach to architecture and her unwavering commitment to sustainable practices. She bought a beautiful light-filled house on a leafy street in a good school district, a home she designed and built for herself and Daniel. It was her name on the deed. Every nail, every beam was a testament to her own strength. Daniel, meanwhile, was growing into a quiet, intensely intelligent young man. He had his mother's sharp, analytical mind, but a passion for a different kind of architecture, the architecture of systems of code of financial markets. He had watched her struggle with the business side of her firm, the invoicing, the project management, the labyrinthine process of securing permits and sourcing materials. While other kids were playing video games, Daniel was teaching himself to code, building small programs to help her streamline her operations. He was a straight-A student, but his real education happened at the dinner table listening to his mother talk about her work. He understood cash flow profit margins and the importance of a brand before he was old enough to drive. He also understood on a visceral level what his father had done. Jessica had never spoken ill of Michael, but Daniel didn't need her to. He saw the story in the lines of fatigue that were etched around her eyes in her fierce independence, and in the way she always insisted on paying her own way, refusing to be dependent on anyone. He harbored a cold, controlled anger towards the man who had caused his mother so much pain. In contrast, the Graham family's foundation was beginning to show signs of stress. Michael had made partner at Sterling Coal, his wealth and influence growing exponentially. Their life was a spectacle of excess. Vanessa, with no career of her own, dedicated herself to being a professional consumer. Their daughters Piper and Paisley grew into petulant, entitled teenagers, miniature versions of their mother. Their family was a perfect branding exercise, but underneath the surface it was hollow. Michael's success was built on high-risk, high-reward investment strategies. In the booming market of the late 2010s, he looked like a genius. He leveraged himself to the hilt, buying a larger mansion, a private jet, a yacht. He mistook the bull market for personal brilliance, a common and fatal mistake. The first tremor came during a minor market correction. One of Michael's highly leveraged funds took a significant hit. It was a taste of what was to come. At a charity event they were both obligated to attend, Jessica saw him across the room. He looked older, the skin around his eyes tighter with stress. He and Vanessa had a brief, sharp argument in a corner, their perfect facade cracking for a moment under the pressure. Vanessa's spending hadn't slowed, and for the first time, Michael seemed unable to sustain it effortlessly. Daniel, now a high school senior, was accepted into MIT's prestigious computer science and engineering program with a full scholarship. He was already working on an idea that had been percolating for years, born from watching his mother's struggles. It was a sophisticated software platform designed to revolutionize the construction and design industry. It would use AI to optimize supply chains, manage project timelines, automate permitting processes, and connect clients with vetted architects and contractors. He called it ArchLink. Jessica's firm became his first beta tester. The platform was brilliant. It cut her project costs by 15% and administrative time by 40%. It was intuitive, powerful, and years ahead of anything else on the market. While Daniel was packing for college, a piece of news sent a shockwave through the financial world. A massive, unforeseen global event, a pandemic, triggered a catastrophic market crash. Industries ground to a halt. The high-flying, debt-fueled stocks that formed the bedrock of Michael Graham's fortune were eviscerated overnight. Sterling Coal Capital was massively overexposed. The firm, once a titan of Wall Street, was suddenly on the brink of collapse. Michael's personal wealth, which was almost entirely tied up in company stock and leveraged real estate, vanished in a matter of weeks. The private jet was repossessed. The yacht was put up for sale at a fire sale price. The creditors began to circle. Jessica watched the news reports with a strange sense of detachment. There was no joy, no schadenfreude. It was like watching a building she had long known was structurally unsound finally begin to crumble. One crisp autumn evening, as Daniel was home from MIT for Thanksgiving break, Jessica's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered, and a voice she hadn't heard in nearly 20 years, a voice now stripped of its arrogance and laced with desperation, came through the line. "Jess, it's Michael. I need to talk to you. I'm in trouble. I'm in serious trouble." The foundation had not just shifted, it had broken. Daniel went from a gifted student to a tech phenomenon with breathtaking speed. While his classmates were pulling all-nighters for exams, Daniel, along with two equally brilliant friends from his dorm, was pulling all-nighters refining the code for Arch Link. He used the connections his mother had painstakingly built over 2 decades to secure his first round of seed funding. Architects and construction magnates who respected Jessica were willing to take a meeting with her prodigy son. They came in skeptical and left as investors. The platform launched during Daniel's junior year at MIT. Its timing was perfect. The post-crash world was desperate for efficiency, cost-cutting, and transparency in the construction industry. ArchLink offered all three. It wasn't just a piece of software. It was a comprehensive ecosystem that eliminated waste and streamlined every phase of a building project. Within 6 months, it was the industry standard. Within 2 years, it was a unicorn, a private company valued at over $1 billion. Daniel Hartwell, the boy who grew up on construction sites, was now one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. But he wore his wealth differently than his father had. He didn't buy supercars or yachts. He drove a modest electric vehicle and lived in a tastefully minimalist apartment in Boston. He invested heavily in his company in green technology and in a charitable foundation he established in his mother's name, the Hartwell Foundation, which funded affordable, sustainable housing projects in underprivileged communities. He was his mother's son, a builder, not a gambler. His fortune was built on something real, something tangible that provided value. It was the polar opposite of his father's, which had been a house of cards built on risky bets and market speculation. While Daniel's star ascended, Michael's plummeted into a black hole. The collapse of Sterling Coal was brutal and public. The firm was gutted, its assets sold off for pennies on the dollar to rivals. Michael, as a senior partner, was personally liable for a staggering amount of debt. The Greenwich mansion was seized by the bank. The designer clothes, the fine art, the jewelry, all of it was liquidated in a humiliating estate sale. Vanessa, who had married for a lifestyle, not for a partnership, could not handle the fall. The life she had known, the shopping sprees, the social status, the envy of other women was gone. The arguments between her and Michael became volcanic. Without the buffer of wealth, their hollow marriage was exposed for what it was, a transaction that had expired. She took their daughters, who were equally ill-equipped to handle a life without privilege, and moved in with her wealthy parents in Florida, filing for a bitter and acrimonious divorce. Michael Graham, the titan of Wall Street, was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a small rented condo in a faceless suburban complex. He was unemployable. His name was toxic in the financial world, a cautionary tale of hubris and ruin. He was forced to take a humiliating job as a consultant for a small third-rate firm, earning a salary that was less than his monthly mortgage had once been. Jessica and Daniel never spoke of him, but they were both aware of his downfall. It was a quiet, unspoken postscript to their lives. They were busy building their future. Jessica's firm was more successful than ever, often using Daniel's ArchLink platform to manage her increasingly ambitious projects. She was respected, fulfilled, and at peace. The ultimate twist of fate came not with a bang, but with a business proposal. One of the few remaining viable assets of the defunct Sterling Coal was its real estate investment trust, REIT, which held a portfolio of commercial properties. The trust was failing, mismanaged, and drowning in debt, but some of the underlying properties had potential. The banks holding the debt were looking for a buyer to take the whole toxic portfolio off their hands for a deeply discounted price. Daniel's company, flush with cash and looking to diversify, saw an opportunity. His acquisitions team, led by a sharp analyst named Ben Carter, the son of one of Jessica's old loyal friends, flagged the portfolio. It was a risky play, but with the right infusion of capital and a complete overhaul of management, it could be turned around and become incredibly profitable. Ben presented the plan to Daniel in the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Archlink's Boston headquarters. "The portfolio is a mess, but the bones are good," Ben explained, pointing to a projection on the screen. "The key is the current managing director. He's the last senior partner from the old guard, the only one who didn't get completely wiped out, but he's desperate. He's been trying to secure a bailout for months and failing. We can acquire the entire trust, including his controlling shares, for a fraction of its potential value." "He'll have to sell? He has no other options." Daniel leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Who's the managing director?" Ben clicked to the next slide. A corporate headshot filled the screen. It was an older, haggard-looking Michael Graham. The room was silent. Ben, knowing the history, looked at Daniel, waiting for a reaction. Daniel stared at his father's face on the screen. He saw not the powerful man from society photos, but a defeated stranger. After a long moment, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. "Draw up the offer." "Ben," Daniel said, his voice perfectly calm, "but I want one condition. I will deliver the offer to Mr. Graham. In person." The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private conference room at the downtown offices of the bank that held the primary debt on the Sterling Coal REIT. It was a cold, impersonal space with a large mahogany table and a view of a gray, unforgiving sky. Michael arrived first, looking like a ghost of his former self. His suit, once bespoke, was now slightly too large for his thinner frame. His face was pale, his eyes puffy from sleepless nights. He was 60 years old and looked 80. He was expecting to meet with a team from a new tech fund, as the bank had told him. He was desperate. This meeting was his last hope to salvage any scrap of his professional life and avoid complete personal bankruptcy. The door opened. In walked not a team of analysts, but a single composed young man in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. Michael squinted, a flicker of confused recognition in his eyes. He hadn't seen his son in person in over 15 years. "Daniel," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Hello, Michael," Daniel said, his tone cool and professional. He didn't offer to shake hands. He simply took the seat at the head of the table, a position of undeniable power. He placed a slim leather portfolio in front of him. Michael stared, his mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. The new tech fund, the potential savior, was his son. The son he had abandoned. The son whose existence he had treated as a financial footnote. The sheer crushing weight of the irony seemed to suck the air from the room. Your company," Michael stammered. "Archlink is the acquiring party." "Yes," Daniel said, opening the portfolio. "We are prepared to make an offer to purchase the controlling interest in the REIT, assume its debt, and prevent it from being dismantled by the creditors." A wave of dizzying, desperate hope washed over Michael. His son was here to save him. It was a miracle, a chance at redemption. "Oh, Daniel, thank God. I always knew you were brilliant. This is wonderful." Daniel held up a hand, cutting him off. His expression remained unchanged, betraying no emotion. "Let's be clear, Michael. This is not a rescue mission. This is a business transaction. My team has assessed the value of the portfolio. It's a distressed asset, and our offer reflects that." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. Michael's trembling hand reached for it. He read the number and the hope in his eyes died, replaced by utter devastation. The offer was for his shares, yes, but it was a rock-bottom valuation. It was just enough to clear his personal debts to the bank and leave him with a tiny, almost insulting amount of cash. Enough to live on, perhaps, in a small apartment, but not enough to ever reclaim a shadow of his former life. It was a clean amputation. It would save the company and its employees, but it would erase him completely. This is nothing, Michael choked out. This is a pittance. I built that company. You built it on sand, Daniel replied, his voice still unnervously calm. And the tide came in. This offer is fair market value for a failing entity. It's more than anyone else has offered you. In fact, it is the only offer. The alternative is the bank forecloses on Monday, and you walk away with absolutely nothing but the debt. The choice is yours. Michael looked at his son, truly looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a boy, but a man he didn't know, a man forged in a fire. Michael himself had set. He saw his mother's resilience, her intelligence, and a cold resolve that was all his own. There was no anger in Daniel's eyes, no hatred. There was something far more chilling indifference. Tears welled in Michael's eyes. "Why are you doing this?" he pleaded. "After everything. Why even bother?" Daniel paused, and for the first time a flicker of something personal entered his voice. "A few weeks ago, my mother was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Institute of Architects. She stood on a stage and she spoke about the importance of building things that last, about creating foundations that can withstand any storm. She never mentioned you, but her entire life is a testament to what she meant." He stood up, his presence filling the room. "I'm not doing this for revenge, Michael. Revenge is an emotional investment, and frankly, you're not worth the capital. I'm doing this because it's a good business deal, and because my mother taught me that when you have the power to build something better from the wreckage, you do it." He pushed his chair in. "You have until 5 o'clock to accept the offer. My lawyer will handle the details." Without another look at the broken man sitting at the table, Daniel turned and walked out of the room. That evening, Daniel met his mother for dinner at her favorite restaurant. The news was already breaking online. Tech billionaire Daniel Hartwell acquires Sterling Coal real estate division in major power play. Jessica looked across the table at her son, her heart filled with a quiet, profound pride. She saw the little boy with the sketchbook, the tired student coding in his dorm room, and the powerful, principled man he had become. "Was it difficult?" she asked softly. Daniel took a sip of water, considering his answer. "No," he said finally. "It was just an accounting, a balancing of the books." They raised their glasses not to victory or revenge, but to a foundation that had proven unshakable, and to a future they had built together, brick by brick. Of course, here is part 8. A decade passed, turning the sharp edges of memory into the smooth stone of history. The acquisition of the Sterling Coal REIT was no longer a dramatic corporate maneuver, but a footnote in the much larger story of Arch Link, which had grown into a global behemoth, reshaping city skylines and fundamentally altering the way humanity built its spaces. Daniel Hartwell, now in his early 40s, was a husband and a father. He had married a brilliant environmental lawyer named Maya, a woman whose passion for justice mirrored his own drive for innovation. They had a daughter, a bright, curious 7-year-old named Sophie. Watching Sophie grow, Daniel finally understood the depth of his mother's sacrifice in a way his younger self never could. He saw how every decision, every late night, every worry had been for him. His own life, filled with a warmth and stability he never took for granted, was the final finished structure built upon the foundation she had laid. He ran his empire not from a throne of arrogance, but from a desk cluttered with his daughter's drawings and models of sustainable urban renewal projects. The Hartwell Foundation had become his true passion, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into creating beautiful, affordable housing that gave families the one thing his mother had fought so hard for: a place to call home with dignity. He was unimaginably wealthy, yet his greatest pride was seeing his mother, now in her 70s, cutting the ribbon on a new community center, her face radiant with purpose. Jessica Hartwell had finally gracefully retired. She'd handed the reins of Hartwell Designs to a talented young partner she had mentored for years. Her days were no longer filled with blueprints and contractors, but with finger painting sessions with Sophie and long walks in the garden of the home she had built. The peace she exuded was absolute. She had won not by defeating Michael, but by building a life so full of love and meaning that his memory had simply faded, like a faint, irrelevant pencil mark that had been erased from the page. One afternoon, an unexpected email landed in Daniel's inbox. The sender was Paisley Graham. He hadn't heard from or about his half-sisters since their mother had taken them to Florida. The email was short and humbled. Paisley explained that after years of drifting, she had become a nurse. The entitlement her parents had bred into her had been a poor shield against the harsh realities of a life without endless funds. She wrote that she was now working at a hospice and had recently cared for a patient who had spent his final days talking about his life's biggest regret, not knowing the son he had. The patient was Michael Graham. He had died 2 weeks prior from a sudden illness alone in a small state-funded nursing facility. His death had gone unnoticed by the world. Paisley wasn't asking for money. She was asking timidly if Daniel might one day be willing to meet so she could simply know a part of the family she had lost. Daniel read the email, a complex wave of emotions passing over him. There was no grief for the man he never knew, but a quiet sorrow for a life so poorly spent. He thought of his own daughter, Sophie, and the fierce, unconditional love he felt for her. How could a father walk away? It was a question he would never understand. He wrote back a simple, kind reply, agreeing to a coffee when she was next in town. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closing a final door, about choosing a small act of grace where his father had chosen cruelty. Later that evening, he found his mother on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and gold. He told her about Michael's death and Paisley's email. She listened silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "He wasted it," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He had all the money, all the power, a chance at a beautiful family. And he wasted it all. What a sad, empty blueprint for a life." Daniel sat beside her, and together they watched the last light of the day fade. There was no sense of victory, no lingering bitterness. There was only a profound sense of peace. The ledgers were balanced, the accounts were closed. The story finally was complete. The house they had built together, a house of love, resilience, and integrity, stood strong and would stand for generations to come. That was the only fortune that ever truly mattered. And so the story of Michael Graham doesn't end with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, irreversible irrelevance. He accepted the offer because he had no choice, living out his days in obscurity, a ghost haunted by the empire he lost, and the son he never knew. Jessica Hartwell, the woman he tried to erase, continued to thrive. Her name etched onto award-winning buildings, her legacy secured not just in steel and glass, but in the character of the son she raised. Daniel's success wasn't just a victory. It was the ultimate karma. He didn't just become richer than his father. He became a better man, proving that what you build with integrity, heart, and resilience is the only fortune that can never be taken away. What do you think? Was Daniel's final move an act of cold justice or a missed opportunity for forgiveness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of betrayal and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of karma and justice. Thank you for listening.